Okay, Max Ralph, it's time to talk a little Penn State football. I'm Bob Flounders. Max is with me. Blue White Breakdown. It's Thursday morning, a couple of days before 2-0 Penn State gets ready for 0-3 Kent State. This is usually a podcast late in the week where we delve into some pretty deep analysis, and we're torn on some of our predictions. I don't think it's going to be like that this week with Kent State, Max, but honestly, it's probably good that this is not, we don't have to talk a lot about this game because there's a lot to get to with the state of the Penn State program. The big news, you were at practice on Wednesday night, and when I saw what happened on social media with some of the leak outs from what James said about Kevin Winston Jr., it caught me a little by surprise because I didn't anticipate his health situation being as serious as James kind of made it out to be. He was vague about it, Max, but it's a long term injury for one of the best safeties, not only in the Big Ten but in the country. In Winston, he left the Bowling Green game in the first half. I think early in the second quarter, we saw him with his helmet off. He didn't look like it. We're not doctors. It did not look super serious, but this is clearly something that's going to sideline Winston for a while. What was your reaction? What did you glean from what James had to say about it? And how worried are you maybe about the back end of this defense, the safety group moving forward?
There are just a ton of factors going on with this because, I'm right there with you that when he went out against Bowling Green, he looked pretty fine on the sideline. He was standing there, no helmet, but he was still in uniform, still
Yep.
with the team. I rewatched the tape about 3 times to see the moment when he got hurt, and I really couldn't find it. It was the start of the second quarter, the very first play. He tracked down Bowling Green's tight end to make a tackle on a long pass. And then the
Mhm.
very next play, he's limping. He was late to the pile, making a short tackle on a run, and he immediately walked off the field. And it was really hard to tell. So I don't know if I don't know what it was. I don't know if he got rolled up on that tackle, if it was a non-contact thing. It's really, really hard to see. But then this week on Monday, James Franklin said, I don't have an update for you guys now, but I think I will on Wednesday, which in my mind immediately went to they're doing some kind of
Yeah.
testing on him probably. Some red flags started to go off that this thing might be a little more serious than we expected. So we get to Wednesday. He says long term, as we all know, long term means probably season ending, if not most of the season. James just doesn't talk about injuries unless that's the case. And so I think it's surprising for sure. The one thing that you can say is Winston's a captain.
Yeah.
And when we talk to all the players, probably one of the uh, most mature, humble guys that we've talked to. They're not losing that presence. James said, Kevin Winston Jr. is still going to be around the team. That's a big thing. I mean, he has taken a big stride in just the way he's held guys accountable. So that's a big thing. But you can't replace what he does on the field. We spent a lot of time talking with James and with the only defensive player we had yesterday after practice was D tackle Kozai Azard. But we spent some time talking about it. We had Cam Miller in the morning. I had a piece over on PennLive that just kind of detailed like what the next steps are. Basically, you're going to see Jalen Reed, who had been playing that
Yeah.
nickel lion position. He's going to move back to safety for now, which, you know, it's fine because Jalen Reed is a talented safety. He's played there for the other 3 years of his career, done a good job, but he was explosive at that lion position. I mean, we watched
Yeah.
him against West Virginia, and Bob, you and I sitting next to each other the whole time. We're just kind of in awe at what he was doing. He looked great.
Yeah.
Um, and Miller's going to move into that lion role, but it's going to be a little bit different with Jalen Reed there because he's a bigger body. They can use that nickel formation against pretty much any offensive package they see. Whereas with Miller, they're a little bit smaller, the true
Yeah.
cornerback body. They can't necessarily use it on early downs quite as much against bigger offensive packages. So that's kind of the short term plan right now. But in the long term, they'd love to see freshman Daewon Lane, might be Dejon Lane, truthfully. I'm not sure. A lot of people have said his name different ways, and I don't think it's in the pronunciation guide. They call him Day Day. So Day Day Lane is the freshman who, if he can, take a step and be ready to go full time at that safety spot, that's how they can get Reed back to the Lion where he's best. But right now, Lane just needs reps, which, talking about a lot of young guys we're probably going to see this weekend. He's number one on my list.
Yeah, and just for Penn State fans, I saw some Penn State fans on social media reacting to the news that it was a the phrase long-term injury, hoping that maybe he could be back for the USC game, right? Illinois is coming up, and that's not going to be an easy game. UCLA home game is looking like a fairly easy game the way that they have started. But at USC, I would just say this, to knowing James Franklin and how he classifies injuries, when he doesn't use the term bumps and bruises about an injury, that to me is code for week to week, possible this week, but not long term. But when he's used the term significant or long term to describe an injury, he did that with Jackson Smolik early in the offseason, and we have not really seen a lot of him. He used it when we saw Andrew Rappleyea on crutches prior to the Bowling Green game, and he used I think long term for that. That's clearly, and to lump this injury into that phrase tells me what you said, that if Winston comes back this year, it's not going to be for a very, very, very long time. So this is the reality for the Penn State defense, eventually entering Big Ten play. And I think I was thinking the way that you were thinking about the Lane kid. It's great to have Jalen Reed as a safety, but where he shines, the closer he is to the line of scrimmage, the more violent he's able to play, the more he can show up more in either short pass coverage or in running plays. But if he has to play deep, I think that's an element that gets taken away from the Penn State defense. His impact against the run and his impact, intimidating receivers on short completions if he has to play deep. So if Lane can be trusted to play deep along with maybe Wheatley, that also frees up Cam Miller, I think, to play just a rotation corner, which is really what I think he is, right? He's not. I don't think he really is best suited, I think, for the Lion. I could be wrong. He's a good coverage player, but they have some things to sort out. And I think Lane is the guy that you and I are going to be watching, hopefully, get a lot of work against a Kent State team that just really is not going to be able to keep up after the first couple of minutes of this game. There are a couple, I think, issues starting to come up with Penn State. We mentioned Rappleyea. I did. So Luke Reynolds is now going to be a guy we need to watch moving forward. He's been greenlit. I think Johnny and I talked about that. So Lane is another guy. And I saw in your story, your post-practice story, James had some things to say about Tamir Robinson, who was a guy at the very start of August, he said, looks different. And then I think I got a little bit banged up in the West Virginia game. But, linebacker is another area where I think they could use another body or two that they can trust. A defensive end, Max, with Amin Vanover being charged with DUI, that position becomes a little bit more uncertain. I don't know how much punishment, if any, he's going to face, because he was playing after. I think Penn State knew about this for a while. So I just think this defense is good, but they're not as deep as they were at the start of the year, and that's a problem.
No, you're absolutely correct, and a couple things to the points you made there. Cam Miller, I agree. I think he's probably better suited on the outside. He is a pretty good tackler from his cornerback position. So those are some things. We talked to Justin Lustig, the special teams coordinator who coaches the Nickels too, last week, and he said sometimes Cam looks really, really good inside. So I think. And Cam himself said he gets to play a little more instinctively at that position. So it's different styles, which is exactly what James Franklin said. Things aren't necessarily changing when Miller is at the line versus Reed, but the looks that they can play it against are different. and their styles of play are different. So it'll be interesting to watch that. But the ripple effect of having Miller at that line position more often is on the linebackers, as you mentioned. They may have to be in more traditional 4-3 looks a little more often than they'd like to. Tom Allen is really more comfortable in that 4-2-5 look than the 4-3, and they're struggling at depth. I mean, they lost Keon Wiley in the offseason for another significant injury, and that was a guy who we thought was going to come in and play a lot. So young players there to keep an eye on. Tamir Robinson, played really well on special teams against West Virginia, but got knocked out late on a kickoff. This is the first time we've seen him at practice in, I think, 3 weeks. And, got a ton of buzz in the offseason, but James flat out said, we need him because that position is low on depth. I think some other names who I'd keep an eye on there behind the obvious names of, Kobe King, Tony Rojas, Tyler Elsdon, Dom DeLuca. I think other names are Dakari Nelson, just moved down there from safety. I think that's a body that they'd like to be able to use and could offer some of that versatility they need on the outside, after losing Winston because of his unique skill set as a former safety. And then freshman Anthony Specca. We have heard some good things about him. I don't think by any means he is a guy who's going to be greenlit. At this point in the season, he could be one of those guys James mentions who it needs to be ready to play later on in the year, but heard some good things about him. He's been with the varsity group in practice all of these weeks. No scout team jersey for him. A young player who certainly is good, and they need depth at that linebacker spot. That's pretty much the bottom line.
Yeah, Max, let's move on to the offensive side. One of the things that your observation from your practice story on PennLive involved Harrison Wallace. It might be nothing. Mm-hmm. Could it be something? He had a big game at West Virginia. Didn't see much of him in the stat sheet against Bowling Green, but it was Tyler Warren Day, and they leaned on the running backs, and they still found a way to get it done. But you thought you maybe noticed something about him not necessarily looking 100%, in practice, at least on one route. How could you just kind of elaborate on that and whether or not you think it's something that you're going to be watching and maybe Penn State fans might want to be watching if he's in the game on Saturday?
Yeah, it's not, we're not allowed to report on injuries. So, I'm not reporting on an injury by any means. He just seemed, I think there was 1 or 2 drills we saw while we were there that he might not have participated in. Nothing happened in practice, so he was participating in what we saw for the most part. He was running routes. I think he'll be good to go, if they needed him on Saturday, but I don't anticipate that being the case. I don't think any of us do. So I think it's probably, especially for a guy who in his career has been injury prone, for lack of a better term. I think they probably just want to take it slow because he's been their best receiver. He is their best receiver. Probably just being cautious with him. Want to make sure he's healthy to get through the year. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play a ton this weekend. Yeah. And, in his stead, again, he's not, I don't think this is actually a concern of any kind, but, in his stead, if he doesn't play a ton this weekend, I think it's Tyler Johnson, the redshirt sophomore. He's been taking the reps in practice behind Trey at that X wide receiver position. So I think, I pointed that out in my prediction for the week too. I think those young group of receivers, including Johnson, Anthony Ivy, Caden Saunders, those guys are going to need to play well this weekend because they are part of a group that needs to be able to be trusted in some level by the end of the year.
Yep, agree, Max. I agree. I don't know how much we're going to – I don't even know how much they're going to even do in the passing game against this Kent State team because it just feels like piling on, you know what I mean? And James, I agree with what James said Monday at his news conference. Kent State's being rewarded handsomely to come in here, and these games are scheduled well in advance. You cannot anticipate Kent State being in the shape that they're in for this game when you schedule it. I mean, Bowling Green's a MAC foe too, and they they gave Penn State all they wanted, and I think they're going to be a pretty dangerous team the rest of the way in that conference. But you just don't know when you schedule these games that they're going to turn out like this. So I don't, this is not Penn State to me paying a team to get beat by about 60 points today. This is just, hey, look, we're in our non-conference schedule. We're not looking for any heavyweight title fights. We'll look to the MAC. They're usually very scrappy. Northern Illinois just won at Notre Dame. You're not sure what you're going to get, but what we're going to get on Saturday is going to be a game that it's not really a game. It's more like, and I'm not trying to say the truth is out there. If you look at what Kent State's done early in the season, they're in no way, shape, or form is this going to resemble what Penn State's fans saw 2 weeks ago against Bowling Green. They were handled pretty well by Pittsburgh in week 1. They lost to an FCS school at home in week 2. And that Tennessee game, it was 71-0. It could have been 171-0. They finally called off the dogs at halftime. Yeah. They asked if they wanted a running clock, and pridefully Kent State said no. But this is going to be what happened last week is probably going to happen this week in some way, shape, or form. So I guess my question for you is, what are you going to be watching, and who are you going to be watching if you're Penn State, and how does Penn State's coaching staff need to approach this game?
You got to approach it like an extension of camp, almost, for lack of a better word. You don't ever want to diminish an opponent in any way. I mean, it's a respect thing in the world of football, but you kind of have to treat this as an extension of camp, because against Bowling Green, who we all thought was, not necessarily a pushover out of the MAC, but we thought was going to be not as close of a game, right? But the reps for the young guys did not come in that game like we thought they would. So this is really your last opportunity before you get to the conference schedule, which, there are teams in the Big Ten that Penn State will play that probably aren't the best this year, but it's still a conference game. You have to be ready for anything. So this is your last chance to get those young guys, some of those freshmen, second-year players who need reps, who need to be on the field in case of emergency later this season. It's your last chance. So I think those guys need to be playing by the late second quarter. You need to have built a multi-score lead and get those guys in there ASAP, because that's what this game is for. And bye games have their place. I mean, every single year you're going to have games like this, but this at this point is a resume booster for Penn State. They need to blow this team out. Yeah. You need to blow their doors off, because they struggled with Bowling Green, and West Virginia is already 1-2 this year. So if West Virginia is not that good, Penn State doesn't have any other games that can really prove they're worth a playoff ranking necessarily, depending on how the rest of the season plays out. So this game is important for a lot of different reasons, even though it's probably going to end up being a 50-point game or worse.
Yeah, 7 touchdown underdogs. These Kent State Golden Flashes are. They have a second-year coach. They're 1-14 since he took over. He's a guy that I think that eventually can gain some traction there, but it's tough when you're non-conference. The MAC can be scrappy enough when your non-conference schedule has a road trip to Pittsburgh, a road trip to Tennessee, and a road trip to Penn State on the schedule. It can be really, really demoralizing. You don't want to get your kids hurt. It's hard to develop depth in games like that, because, Penn State's and Tennessee's third string guys are probably significantly better than your first teamers. So I am sympathetic to their cause. I don't know how you dig out of this, but from the Penn State side of things, I agree with what you said. Just a couple of guys, assuming good health, right? Assuming good health, Cam Wallace, Quentin Martin, if he's healthy, 2 running backs. I just want to see some of them. I definitely want to see Luke Reynolds involved, even if it's briefly in the passing game. He's been okay as a blocker. Let's just see what he looks like, in space, maybe catching the ball. He's a guy. We mentioned Tamir Robinson as a linebacker. I don't know who are the other defensive ends they could turn to in this game that maybe they would turn to later in the season. So I don't know if there's some upside plays there. But I would say Elliott Washington at corner is a guy that's flashed whenever he's been on the field. He's one of the fastest players. I'd like to see a little bit more of him. And a guy, let's not forget about Cooper Cousins. If
Hmm.
ever there was a game to see him get, 20 reps, in the second half, I mean, the guy looks like he's ready to go. I mean, you're always going to need depth on the O-line. Those are just some of the guys to me, Max. And honestly, I don't know how you feel, but I don't necessarily need to see a lot of Bo Prabula in this game, only because of his value to Penn State's offense against some of the better teams they're going to face. If you give him an extended look and he gets hurt, that really kind of transforms your offense, I think, in a bad way. So give him some snaps, but I would not be getting him the ball in space or throwing it to him. You just want him healthy. So those are some guys for me, Max. Are there some guys for you, just out of curiosity or maybe out of necessity, you think Penn State needs to play?
Certainly with you on the thought about Bo, because I would love to see some of those younger quarterbacks. They've got a true freshman in
Yeah.
Ethan Grunkemeyer and Jackson Smolik, who you said had a significant injury in the spring. We've seen him at practice. He's been ruled out every game this season, but he's actually dressed in
Yeah.
at the home game this past week, I believe. But Grunkemeyer has been dealing with bumps and bruises too. So, not really sure what the availability of those guys is going to end up looking like, but I would love to see him. Cam Wallace was a great poll by you. Guys only got 9 carries this year, but in years past,
Yeah.
that number 3 running back spot has been important for Penn
Mhm.
State. So I think he is. I think he's absolutely somebody to watch this weekend who's going to touch the ball a ton. Young receivers already mentioned, but another huge one who looked great in practice, by the way, and continues to just impress me every time I see him, just with the way he runs routes, his ball skills. Tysier Denmark, the true freshman, I think I'll make a prediction. I think he winds up with 4 or more catches this weekend. And I think defensively, Elliott Washington is a guy who's creeped toward that starter reps type deal. So I think he'll be playing a ton early on. Day Lane, absolutely. We already talked about why he'll be
Mhm.
important. Specca. And then up front, I'd love to see Max Granville get just a couple pass rush snaps.
Yeah.
The kid who reclassified into this class, he was supposed to be a 25 commit, but came in. He's a good pass rusher. I watched his high school film pretty extensively. He's got all the skills. He's instinctive up front. He knows what he's doing. Just waiting on his body to catch up and learn some of the more technical things up front. But I think I'd love to see him just get a couple pass rushes. If he could end up being a specialist of any kind, in very minimal action, it'd be interesting. I think those are really the big ones. I mean, granted, we're not going to be able to list off every guy who's going
Yeah.
to see the field this weekend. There are certainly more at D tackle, at linebacker, at safety, at every position. But I think those are some of the big ones who I'm really curious to see get out there and see how they perform.
Yep. Okay, Max Ralph, we are almost ready to wrap up this blue-white breakdown podcast, but I think, as you know, Penn State fans, if hopefully they are still watching and listening to us right now, there are a lot of Penn State fans that are going to be betting this game with an
It's
eye
true.
towards the spread, and the spread
It's true.
sounds pretty bad. It's 49, open at 48 and a half. But I have I feel pretty confident that about 98.4% of the Penn State fans who are going to bet on this game are going to lay those 49, as crazy as it sounds. So let's give our picks and be
Mm-hmm.
held accountable, because, I mean, you see it in every Penn State game they're playing against heavy dogs. Bo Prabula became a fan favorite last year for his magic at Northwestern and at the West Virginia game last year. If they're going to hang around, chances are they're going to hang around to see if Penn State can cover. Where do you sit on your game prediction?
Um, I do think Kent State scores. Let me just start with that. I think they get into the end zone because, this Penn State defense is clearly working through some stuff, and we'll be working through more things without KJ Winston. But I'm going with 63-7. I do have them covering that spread. James Franklin just is not gonna pump the brakes like Josh Heupel did at Tennessee. And truthfully, like he might pump the brakes, but like they're gonna get some late scores because, as always, as you mentioned, that second, third team, they need to prove they can do it on the field. So I expect at least one or two scores in the third and fourth quarter. I think this game's over by midway through the second quarter. 63-7 is what I got, but I do expect late scores, and I think Penn State probably covers.
Yeah, Max, 63 has been a popular number in recent years when Penn State plays non-conference foes at Beaver Stadium. They did it twice, 63 against Delaware, 63 against UMass, and I think that included, did Hardy have 2 punt returns for touchdowns in that game or something crazy? Or he had at least
You are
one.
correct.
Yeah.
He had 2 against UMass, yeah.
Yeah, he had 2. I know it sounds crazy. I feel like this is a game that they're going to cover fairly easily because of all of the things you outlined, and I do think that Penn State's gonna, on offense at least, they're gonna call off the dogs, I think, fairly quickly. I don't even think they're gonna throw the ball that much. But the problem is, as James has said before, when you get your second and third team guys in the game, you have to let them play to a certain extent. You can't just take a knee. So watching what I saw from Kent State against Tennessee, I know that Penn State's defense has been won't bear its fangs, but they've also heard a lot about not starting fast against Bowling Green. So that has me a little curious about a shutout, and I think it will be a shutout. I picked it 67-0. I know it's a weird score, but the talent disparity, and I think Kent State psychologically can't be in a very good place. They have a couple of players I think that could make an impact on some major programs, but they're young. They're not deep. They have to be sore and hurting after what happened at Tennessee. And I just think that Penn State, if it stays out of its own way, is going to cover this game just based on their depth and the fact that some of the young players know this is their only chance they're going to get a chance to play, so they want to try and turn some heads. I think it's a pretty easy cover. I'm wrong a lot, but I have it 67-0. You have them covering as well. I think this line should have been closer to 56. I know that sounds crazy, kind of where you picked it, but I mean, we'll see. But I have a feeling that every Penn State fan is going to have their money on Penn State. So I do think you're going to have a lot of curiosity. I'll be anxious to see how Penn State cannot get into the 50s in this game, just because they're an explosive offense. They've got explosive athletes. They've got an explosive play designer. I think almost by accident it's going over.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The psychological part you mentioned, I think, is great, because let's be honest, if you're a college football player and you've been beaten down already twice, and including a game you never thought in a million years you were going to lose to St. Francis, like how do you go out there on the road against another top 10 team and get yourself ready to play? I think on the Penn State side, it's not that hard. I think that they have a lot to play for this weekend. So I've seen some people ask about that. I don't really think that this is a challenging game for Penn State to prepare itself for, because young guys have stuff to prove, and so does even Penn State's number one defense, like you said. So I think it's a bloodbath in the nicest way possible. And I think it's an easy cover. I do think the line is a little low, but I'm holding on. Kent State's going to score once. Yep.
It could happen. Hey, I think if there's what I think we kind of agree on what's going to happen. I think for us, selfishly, there's going to be an opportunity for us to get started on our stories in the press box fairly quickly. But also, I think we're going to be able to write some things about some Penn State players that are younger that we're not really going to have a chance to write about
Yep.
them, the rest of the year. So it could
Mhm.
be, hear me out, Max, hear me out, Penn State fans. It could be a win, 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 a triple win, right? It's a win for
Wow.
Penn State because they're getting $1.6 million because Johnny
True.
McGonigal had a story about that. It's a win for Penn State because they're going to be 3-0 going into a big game against Illinois next week, kick off their Big Ten season at home. People are buzzing about that already. If Illinois beats Nebraska on Friday, it's going to be an even bigger game. And it's a
Oh
win
yeah.
for the Penn State media because we're going to have some things to write about from players we just won't have a chance to write about moving forward. So it's a triple win for me. And I feel pretty good about this prediction. Max, I'll see you in the press box on Saturday. I will bring your charging cord. Don't
Oh yeah.
I have not. It's already in my bag. I absconded with it last week, 2 weeks ago by accident. Penn State
Yep.
fans, I think you're going to have a big smile on your face. It'll be an even bigger smile if you bet the game and they cover the 49.
Yeah. I will just say, when the revenue sharing era hits in college football, which is soon, Kent State's got a great head start with all these bye games they're playing. So that's my parting shot.